it comes down to the fact that there's a lot of us that still do want to believe in God. And you can. There's a bigger God than the one that gets portrayed in white American Christianity.
I am so glad to introduce Anna Howard to the show. It was wonderful to talk to her about her book, Inward Apocolypse, Uncovering a Faith for the Common Good. It was so encouraging, and this is a message that so many of us need. I know that if you are deconstructing your faith, not sure what you believe, wanting to hold on to God, but just not sure how, this is a really good conversation for you. Please like this video. Please share this with someone else. Let's build community with fellow people who are struggling the same way that we are. Let's jump right in. Hello, Anna. Thank you so much for coming and being on the Epic Kate Show. I'm so glad
thank you for having me. I love the name, by the way. I don't think I had said that earlier. I love that you call it that.
Thanks. Yes, I'm so glad that Caitlin Shetler could connect us and that I could read your book. It was such a meaningful expression. So it's artistic, poetic, logical. Like these steps, they're all so necessary in just rebuilding a faith that is, like the tagline of the book is, for the common good. And yeah, what made you confront the theology that just rubbed you the wrong way? Was the nice white person narrative a part of that? I'd love to hear more of your thoughts on that nice white person thing.
Yeah. Well, so it was a number of things at once, but the systemic racial element of a lot of in the book I talk about American Christianity, and by that I mean white American Christianity, evangelical, non-denominational. There's sort of what you tend to think of if you think of the religious right, like all of that. There's sort of a stream of thinking that is fairly unique, and it's not just in America, but that's where I'm situated. So there's definitely versions of it. I know for sure, like in the UK, and you could tell me what you see in terms of other places in Europe and Sweden and whatnot. But I'm just not familiar with that. So speaking of what I know, right, by context. So I started unpacking, a lot of the things that I was led to believe. And one of the big moments for me was just like, I didn't want to believe it was wrong to be gay anymore. Really handy since I turned out to also be queer myself, but I had to put it down first for other people before I could see it myself because I'm bi, and so I just ignored that other half, right? And so, but one day, this was one of the example of, I just was like, it feels like a burden. I don't want to carry this anymore. What if I just stop believing this? Like, I don't have a reason. I can't explain it to you theologically at the time. I can now, if we wanted to go there. But and I was like, what if I just stop believing this? And it just felt like this release. And I was like, okay, if I'm going to be wrong, I'm going to be wrong on the side of love and acceptance. And so that sort of started moving forward. And then there's so much, just the patriarchy and other things. Just felt like I can't believe this anymore. Like, is there anything left for me to believe? And then getting on to like the nice white person narrative that you were talking about, like, what does that mean? And so it's kind of part and parcel with this. Like, a lot of people think, those of us of European descent, especially in the United States, think that if you're just like a nice person, that's enough. Like, you don't use racial slurs, you don't you don't actively discriminate in your own life, or at least you don't think you do, like that sort of a thing. So that's enough. But it's not, because all of us are benefiting from and participating in systems of systemic oppression. Which is actually a much bigger problem than, people who call slurs and whatnot, they're a problem, sure. Especially at an individual level and threats of violence and whatnot, that can be a problem. But what is systemically oppressive and systemically violent are the systems. I use systemically and systems a lot there. But anyways, it's in our government, it's in the DNA of our country, it's in the DNA of really several Western countries, when you think of it, if we expand it to the European context. But again, speaking of what I know in the United States, So yeah, so that was the nice white person narrative that I confronted, like in my own life, like, oh well, I'm not actively racist, am I? Like, no, there's all these things I've been raised to believe that I just was in a lot of ways trained not to pay attention to. And
It's
that's the thing I think is like we are raised to not pay attention to these things. And we have to teach ourselves to do the opposite. And it's really important if
yeah.
we want everyone to thrive. Yeah.
And isn't it just so nuts when you look back and you see just how whitewashed and propaganda filled the American education system is?
Yeah. It still is. There's places it's starting to do better, but yeah, it's still like very whitewashed. Oh, case in point, just in the last week, an unnamed aide in the Biden administration was quoted by the New York Times um, as feeling like the feeling of having, quote, escaped the massacre at Little Bighorn as a result of the midterm elections. And I was like, one, I can't believe he said that, or she, I actually don't know them. And two, that the New York Times just quoted it because the Little Bighorn was an example of an indigenous victory over the oppressive white troops who were coming to slaughter them. It was not a massacre. It was a military victory for the indigenous people. And so like reframe it as it always has been. I mean, there's movies and stuff about the Custer's Last Stand and like all of that stuff. So to reframe it when the European colonists were the ones doing the massacring, to reframe it as a massacre the other way is an example of whitewashing history. And it's become a common thing that this person just popped into their head and they said it, and the New York Times just quotes it without even thinking about it because everyone's going to know what this means. And I'm like, this is how far we still have to go. I mean, this was just 2 weeks ago, and as a result of as we were looking at results of the midterm elections here. So
So I wanted to move over to your book that in it
sure.
you share a lot about your journey of long distance hiking, just getting out there in nature, and not for the speed, not for agility or parkour, but really just walking and experiencing nature and pushing yourself to the limit. It's really, really neat thing. It's not something I even was aware of like existing, even though it seems kind of obvious. But how have you experienced God in nature?
Yeah. So just my ADHD brain wants to clarify that parkour is an urban thing, not a.
I did not script that. I am just off the books.
All good. Yeah, no, just for those listening, we need definitions of these things. But so experiencing God in nature. So getting out and starting to hike, it actually came as sort of a call, which I'm getting a little bit bolder at talking about because I feel like the trail called me or nature called me or whatever. And people are like, what? But I told this, so there was this ad I saw on Facebook, and the anti-capitalist in me does not want to admit that life-changing things can come from ads, but every so often, this is what happened. Trying to sell the truth. So I saw this ad on Facebook for hiking boots from a company that I had previously bought shoes from. And I was just suddenly like this deep sense of longing. Like I want to be the kind of person that actually needs to wear those, like not just because I bought boots, but like I need to be like out there on the trail and whatnot. And so I told, and they were like, there was a holiday sale. It's like after Christmas. And I was like talking to my husband, I'm like, is it stupid to buy hiking boots when I haven't really started hiking? Like, because I want to, should I just order them while they're on sale? And he was like, well, yeah, go for it. That's what you want to do. But like, you look at trail runners, because all the long distance hikers are wearing trail runners these days. Like those, I think through hiking Appalachian Trail or long section hikes or whatever. It's like, oh, that's interesting. Anyways, I ended up buying trail runners. Long story short, and I started walking like that same day. Like I ordered the trail runners at like 2 a.m. because I used to stay up crazy late on New Year's Eve, 2020, and I started walking that same day later after sleeping some. And I just had this like, I want to get off the concrete. I want to get on the trail. I want to start hiking. And there was just this sense of this is where I'm supposed to be. Like a deep sense of belonging in a way I haven't really felt anywhere else. And so, I mean, I feel like that has to be because we talk about natural revelation, like that's God somehow in there. Do you know what I mean? Talking through the experience or talking through nature. And then I hear things in nature too. There's like revelation, thought, thinking. It's everything from my own thinking thoughts to completion while I'm walking, which Rebecca Solnit in her book wanderlust, so that the human brain works at 3 miles per hour, which is a fairly average walking speed. Now, I can't hike quite that fast because of trail. I'm not on pavement, but you know, and she even wonders, and I'm not going to do justice to the quote, but she even wonders if the fact that we travel so much faster all the time means that our modern life has sort of gotten past the speed of thought or thoughtfulness, which I think is a really interesting way to think about it. And so when I'm hiking, especially if I'm hiking by myself, like yeah, I can think thoughts to completion. I can think of things in ways I hadn't. And sometimes I'll just sit at the base of a tree or sit by a stream, and things will come to me that are from outside me. Is it God? Is it the tree? Is it both? I don't know.
It sounds so peaceful, and it's sad that there's like this like push against that, because it's like, well, I don't want to be considered new agey, that don't want to step my toe too far over and make people think I'm weird. But like the mystics and the ancient Christians were so much more connected to nature, and Francis of Assisi, and I think probably the lady who invented music. Do you know who I'm? Saint Hilda?
Okay.
Or does that name ring a bell to you?
Saint There is a Saint Hildegard, yeah. Hildegard of Bingen.
I have a feeling she was really getting something out of nature too. But
yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned music like that. I was talking to another friend of mine. I homeschool my kids. I was talking to another homeschool mom, and feeling inadequate as you do when you find out someone else's kids are doing more than yours, right? And both of her kids play violin at young ages. They're barely older than mine. And I'm like, have I messed up not starting my kids on stringed instruments like 5 years ago? Do you know what I mean? And I said something out loud like that to her, and she was like, but you take your kids out in nature, you hike all the time. That teaches them to listen to the world and listen to the music of nature. And so it's not like you're not giving them that experience. It just looks different for you. And I was like, oh, it was just very validating. I love that she thought of it that way, because in some ways it's very unstructured. There's no way to really teach that. You kind of have to take people out and say, here's the world.
So has hiking helped you connect with the real, actual brown Jesus?
Yeah. So when we talk about brown Jesus, I know you and I were talking earlier about brown Jesus versus white Jesus. And so I think we have to be clear that brown Jesus is the only Jesus.
Indeed. White Jesus is
the historical idol. Jesus was brown. Yep. White Jesus is a construct. And I would go so far as to say an idol that has sort of been set up in opposite of what I see as a historical Jesus in scripture. And Jesus walked everywhere he went. And now that was also the primary mode of transportation in that day. So, I mean, I'm not going to say that Jesus would never have driven a car if he was here today, but I think there is something about going back to walking at the speed of thought. And conversation too. So when I hike with other people, we end up having some very deep conversations sometimes. It just sort of spring out of nowhere. And that's not just me. I haven't done any through hikes, like super long distance. I've done some multi-day backpacking. And so I haven't quite had, but you do sort of sit down when you're talking to other hikers. I've had a few of these experiences, even doing short ones where you just sit down, you start talking, and you can immediately get into some deep stuff. And sometimes you forget to exchange names, kind of a thing, unless you're like walking along further. But it's just like you're both already having this common intense experience, and so you just have these deep conversations. And so it's kind of fun to imagine what Jesus must have talked about with the crowds of folks that followed him around. More than just the 12 named dudes, there was other people.
Yeah. I love those random encounters with people where it gets deep and you don't exchange names because it's inconsequential. It's like seeing a little bit of a divine spark of Jesus' divinity in them in those moments.
Yeah.
Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, just you sort of get essence as opposed to the surface level where you start. And sometimes I wish I'd exchanged names with people as we left, like, oh, I could have looked them up and maybe we could have talked more later, like some other time. But beyond the sort of like gathering where you start out with, hi, I'm so and so, what do you do? And they usually mean, where do you work? And like that kind of stuff. You just go straight into, man, yesterday while I was hiking, I don't know, this thing happened and like reminded me of something. And, now we're, into something much deeper than who we are. And yeah, I've talked to folks, and I like literally, didn't get their names or what their profession was or whatever. And it was, what mattered was that we were out there hiking and we were thinking about, whatever the conversation would be.
If you're anything like me, it's just like I have no idea when it's appropriate to bring stuff up. So I'm just over here trauma dumping. Like
It's like that meme I saw the other day that it was like when people are like, so tell me about yourself. And it's like, do you want like where I grew up, or do you want to hear about my trauma? I need specifics here, like my favorite color, like
how much are you comfortable with? Because it's all on the table for me.
yeah, exactly.
Let's see. What does it? Oh yeah, this is a good one. I'm really I'm happy about these thoughts here. This was a part of your book. There was a part of your book that the words really jumped out to me, and that's the wild inside. And how was the wild inside trained out of you? And like, what does it mean to connect with the wild inside of us?
Yeah, yeah. So I think that kids naturally understand the connection to nature and the wild. I mean, you put a kid out in the woods, and I mean, I've seen kids running up trails barefoot. Do you know what I mean? And they're just completely in sync with it. And I trail run, but I do it with shoes on because, I'm worried about stone bruises and stuff. I do wear very minimalistic shoes, but it's like at least a layer of protection if I take a misstep. And they don't hurt themselves. They're in sync with the trail, and they're used to running, and they're like in control of their bodies. And we lose like a lot of these things. You put a toddler in the woods and they're like showing you leaves and rocks, and actually my kids still do that. In fact, I don't have a whole bunch right here. I transferred them, but I opened my prayer book the other day to like look something up, and I found like all these leaves that I had set in there to press because my 8-year-old had brought them to me on like a hike from, I don't know, a couple of weeks or months ago. And I have like a jar on my mantle that's full of like bark and seed pods and nuts and things like that they've given me. And it's like, well, instead of just having them laying somewhere, I turned them into art, like I'm in a display. Because they instinctively understand that nature is a gift. And when they find something extra cool, like a leaf on the ground that's shaped like a heart or whatever, they're like, oh, Mom, I want to give this to you. And it's precious because it's like they recognize it as a treasure and a gift and something that can be like passed on. And so I've just turned it into like different display areas in my house. But anyways, you were asked about how the wild gets trained out of it. So I remember, or my mom actually tells a story that when I was born in Alaska and I lived in Juneau, and there was this pond behind our house, and she couldn't find me one day. And I was about 2 years old. And so she's, frantically searching the house, and then she thinks to look outside, and she finds me standing in the pond, like looking away from the house, like waist deep in water. And it was like, what? Yeah, so scary from a parent's perspective, but like from my perspective, I'm like, where was I trying to go? Like, what was I trying to get to? And like, there's this great series of pictures. My uncle was out visiting, and we were walking somewhere, and my brother was asleep in the car, and you could do that at that point. So she went back to check on him because he was like a baby, like 6, 8 months old or something. And she tells my uncle, like, don't let her put her feet in the water. It's glacier melt. I mean, it's not warm, it's glacier melt. And so my uncle just stands there, not being a parent himself at that point, or actually it probably wouldn't have mattered, snapping pictures of me. So there's this entire series of pictures of me taking my shoes off and looking at him, taking my socks off, and then sticking my feet. Like, like I'm always gonna like immerse myself every time I've gone to the beach and like and not wearing a swimsuit. I'm like, I'll just wade in the water. I always end up getting like wet to the waist, like even anyways. But yeah, but as I got older, the things I wanted to do, I was discouraged from doing. It's like either because I was a girl and I wasn't supposed to do it by myself, or because I had asthma, and there was no conversation of, well, let's train this to make sure your lungs can do this, like at this altitude or like whatever. And like all the dangers were brought up, whether that was from my parents or from just other people. Like, there's snakes, there's men, there's like whatever you can think of. You can't go out in the world by yourself and do these things. And so it just sort of like took me until really into my early 40s now to like reconnect with like who I could be, and that sense of connection with nature, and the fact that you are actually, I mean, you need to be smart and you need to be prepared, but it's actually pretty safe to be in the woods. A lot safer than a lot of places actually. And there's no such thing as no risk. That's another thing that people are like, well, there's no risk. I'm like, well, yeah, but life has risk.
Yeah.
So
So, how can we connect to the wild inside of us?
I think that we just need to look and see, like, almost go back and examine our childhoods and see
Mm.
what we used to do that got sort of pushed to the side, especially if it was encouraged by other people. Do you know what I mean? Because kids are very wise when it comes to that. And if we can go back and see, like, what did little me know? Because kids know this stuff and adults forget. So we could watch kids too, if you like, you could like look back at your own self, but also just watching. And I think that was actually part of what helped me was watching my own kids and interacting with this. And I always wanted nature to be a big part of like who they were. But I live in the woods, and I was scared to go into my own woods for the
Mm.
first 8 years or so that I lived here. Like I wouldn't go past there's like a field where we built the house that had been cleared like before we came, and I would just stay in the cut grass and I wouldn't go into the edges.
It's like once you become a grown up and it's all about getting to someplace on time, and
Mm,
I'm too tired and I just want to get home, and you lose that sense of adventure and that sense of appreciating beauty, and it's just so sad.
yeah. And I think it's a core part of who we are as humans. And it's, a combination of, whether we were told it wasn't safe or just modern life sort of pushes it out to the edges or so that we can't, and you have to be intentional about reclaiming that time. So,
Mm. Reminds me of a bit of the conversation I had with this person. I think you'd probably like him. His online, he goes by the Geek Preacher,
oh, cool.
and he talked about how play is just such a intrinsic part of being human. Like, yeah, that's kind of the same thing there. Okay, here we go. What does it mean to build a faith for the common good?
So it is a big question. Let's see if we can put it into a condensed answer. So common good is talking about our mutual thriving, and not just as humans, but all of creation, right? So we can't leave out the planet in this. But if everyone thrives, then no one's left out, not even you. And so I think a lot of times we have this view of we're competing for resources, and the truth is there's enough resources for everyone. We just need to look at how we're using them and how they're distributed. And what I see in the Bible, and obviously the Bible is a set of scripture, set of texts from a very different time, a very different context. And I think a lot of what we get wrong about what the Bible says is because we don't put it in its own context and see what God is doing. So there's some like very difficult passages, some things where you're like, God doesn't go far enough. Like, why was this okay? Um, but if you look at what God's doing in the context, you see God meeting people where they're at and then helping them move towards more justice and more equity and all those things. And so I think what we have to do is we have to extend arcs out from what we see in scripture and how to apply that to our day. If God is always moving people towards more justice and more equity, it's not what did God say in the specific situation in the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament, to this person. And how does that work? Like we can only look at it this way. It's like, no, how is God moving these towards justice? One of my, it's not really a favorite example, but it was something that I thought was kind of revelatory. It was the example of the woman who was supposedly caught in she was unfaithful and the husband drags her in the Old Testament. I can't think of the reference right now. He takes her to the priest and the priest makes her drink dusty water. And then is it talking about like a forced abortion or a miscarriage or like, what is this like weird stuff going on? And God is okay with this. And what is that? But if you look at the parallel cultures at the time, if a man suspected his wife had cheated on him, he could just kill her and there would be no consequences for him. And so God's setting this up. She could be stoned by the community. Like, no, the accusation was enough. Um, and so God's setting this up where she drinks dusty water. It's actually like a protection of women.
Yeah.
And the punishment is completely left up to God in terms of what happens. So like the priest mixes some dust from the temple floor into water and the woman drinks it. Now this is not going to cause her any physical harm at all. and the husband can't do anything else after this judgment has been enacted. And so if you look at this going, okay, so she, instead of killing her just to go drink, this, God is protecting women. So what does it look like to protect women and to protect the oppressed, like in our day and age? That's the question to ask, like from things like that. And then if you look at like really, really stories that would have just been considered wild, in another sense of the term, the only person in the Bible who names God is Hagar. And the fact that this is recorded in this super patriarchal society, that this minority woman who was enslaved, she's a victim of sexual assault and abuse, and like all this other stuff. I mean, she, you know, go down the list of the trauma she endured. She's the one who gets to name God, and she names God the one who sees me. And that's just, I mean, so you have to look at what makes it in, not get what got left out in some ways, because the number of women that do actually have named roles in the Bible is unusual for that time period. Anyway, not to get off on a whole bunny trail, but like, yeah, so the faith for the common good, we could see these arcs of justice and equity, and we're always supposed to be moving towards the next step, not going back and going, oh, we have to go back to, you know, whatever.
I gotta find the right verse that affirms that God hates the same people I do.
Exactly. I just don't see it. And if you interpret all of the Bible through the lens of Jesus' life too, you can't get there either.
Yeah.
If you look at who Jesus talked to and who Jesus included and all of that. So
that is a beautiful thing, that in your book, it just is so logical that faith is not impossible, because evangelical fundamentalist thinking is not the only faith that is. Like, that's
right.
a couple hundred years old. It's you'd mentioned earlier that people had said like, oh, I can't be a Christian anymore because I can't hate gay people and I can't believe
Right.
eternal punishment. Like, yeah, you don't have to.
Right. That's literally what I wanted some of these folks to get out of this. Is just like, you don't like, I don't see that in the Bible anyway. So let's like reformat, or not reformat, but like reframe rather, all of this by understanding. And a lot of it comes back to understanding the context, which is why all of us need to be a little bit more of theologians in our life if we want to pursue that. So,
And in the whole thing of taking the Bible so literally that you miss really important details. And it's, yeah, like for example, we had talked about, there's a first verse in First John about light and dark. That is, yeah, it's a metaphor that's twisted and lost its meaning. And yeah, can you share about that?
Yeah, or metaphors that are things that are metaphors that we try to make literal.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that I was telling you about, I'm doing this Advent series, like kind of re-exploring and reclaiming both the wild and the dark, because it's bothered me that in theological conversations we use the wilderness as an example of a bad place, or a time of darkness as a bad place, when both of these things are gifts and are necessary. And so the verse we were talking about in First John, I think it's 1:5. I had looked it up right before we started talking so that I would have it fresher, but I'm not 100% sure anymore. It says in God, God is light, and in God there is no darkness at all, which makes it sound like, really, white, white is good, black is bad, light is good, darkness bad, good, evil, black, all these things. And what it is there's the word there can literally mean darkness, but it can also be used metaphorically to mean like obscuring, or even possibly lying, like obscuring the truth. And so if you take that and you look at, walk in the light, walk in the truth, which we find in other places in scripture as sort of parallels, you could say that it was saying in God is truth, and in God there is no deception, which I think is a lot more literal than trying to make darkness always the bad guy. So yeah, I see a lot of examples of things that were supposed to be metaphorical or poetic being taken literally. It's just like, no, we can't.
And it's just the fruit of taking everything the Bible literally has led to a lot of death.
Yeah, it says Kevin Garcia, right? Bad theology kills. That's his it's definitely his tagline. He may have written a book on that. It's actually called that. I have to go look that up. But yeah, he definitely says it a lot.
Who are the people that break your heart, and what do you want to say to them?
I think, I mean, it's in a lot of ways the people that I wrote the book for, that inspired it, because of those conversations that you referenced. And for those that haven't read it yet, I talk about this in the book. I basically had the same conversation with different people over the course of about a year, and they didn't know each other. And they basically said the same thing. Like, I wish I could be a Christian, but I can't believe, or I wish I could still believe in God, but I can't be a Christian anymore because of, and then fill in the blank, the homophobia or the racism or, patriarchy, misogyny, et cetera, et cetera. And really got me, thinking over the course of that year, like, how would I talk to them? So, and I think that it comes down to the fact that there's a lot of us that still do want to believe in God. And you can. There's a bigger God than the one that gets portrayed in white American Christianity. And that is the God of, not just the Bible that we see like there, but the God of the hush harbors, where people who were enslaved in terrible conditions in this country found a faith worth believing, that was outside of the faith of the enslavers' church and outside of the white faith, even then. So even in those situations, if there's a faith that gives hope to people who are enslaved, and there's it's actually, I have it here someplace. The book I just from a podcast I just listened to, where they were talking about faith-based organizing and buried seeds, and talking about how the roots of faith inspired both the people that were like enslaved in the hush harbors and also the roots in so for those of you watching, I'm recording with a migraine, which means I sometimes lose words that I otherwise should know, and then I get embarrassed about it because it's like, no, I do that. But the book is by Brandon Rentra and Dr. Alexia Salvatierra, and she was talking about her experience where all the organizing that she was doing was coming out of like an ecumenical movement of faith. And it's like, if there's faith that gives you the strength to stand up to enslavers and the strength to stand up to oppressive governments and all of that, then there is something to this. There's something that's real, and there's something that's still worth believing in all of that. So
that's really heartening. And it's like, yeah, there's just so much grief in the process of acknowledging, whoa, there was a lot of years that I was wrong. I was perpetuating toxic, poisonous things. I was hurting people. I was, and you feel complicit and icky, and then think, ooh, it's the word Christian just has an icky association with it. It's like how you used to see an American flag and go, oh yeah, proud to be an American. And then it's been co-opted by the fascists, and you see an American flag and you're like, is that a safe person? Like,
right. And that's sad.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's not like we need to be, I mean, there's obviously, we don't need to be nationalists because that's a problem there, but like, we should not feel negative about the flag of the country. Like, we shouldn't have to anyway.
Didn't have to.
Or the word Christian, and those two things don't need to go together at all. But it is things that have been co-opted and then mashed together in a really unholy alliance. So
yeah. So how do we get our hands on your book and get that encouragement?
Well, it is available wherever books are sold. So you may not find it in the bookstore, but they can order it for you. So
that would probably be good for them to do that, huh?
Yeah. Go to your local bookstores and ask them to order the book, because maybe they'll stock more copies than the one you asked for. So.
Yay. I will put all the links that you want me to put in the description. And if anybody would like to reach out to you, are you open to that?
Yeah, sure. I would say that my Substack, or through one of my social medias, is probably one of the best ways to get me. Just shoot me a DM or leave a comment on my Substack or in the chat if you have the app. So
sounds good. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we say goodbye?
No, I can't think of anything else.
Rightio. Well,
I really appreciate you having me on. This is a really fun conversation, besides the fact that I lost a few words in there, but that's okay. We'll find them somewhere.
Yeah, no worries. So the way that I end my conversations is I give hugs. Hugs. Yes, thank you very much, and bye. Thank you for listening and being here and letting these words resonate with you, check out my other conversations on this channel. I've talked to so many awesome people, and check out my vlogs where I share about life in Sweden and precious memories and the reality of my life. Hugs!